All right, well, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to lead this discussion. And in fact, I just watched the film again before we joined here and forgot already how rich it was. I mean, that's the problem with the Aral Sea and all these other environmental crises is that, um, the baseline perceptions change, and we can forget things so quickly. But so many rich stories and history embedded in that very short film. And I'm really honored that James and Annie could join us, as well as Aynabat and Kate Waters, to discuss this film. I'm Eric Asadorian. I'm a long-term sustainability researcher and the director of the Gaian Way, which is an eco-spiritual organization working to reconnect people with the living earth that they are part of and completely dependent on, but somehow have forgotten that. So we do this through events like this, through writings, as well as two projects, the Earth Eclectic Eco Music Radio Hour, as well as the Cycles of Gaia Ecological Calendar and School Curriculum. And as far as this event, I'm very pleased to get to introduce four speakers today who will all talk about different aspects of the Aral Sea crisis. I tried to remember when I first learned about this, and I think it was in the very first year I was at the World Watch Institute. And it became one of those sadly perfect case studies on how human short-sightedness can destroy a shared resource that took millennia or millions of years to develop, and in just three generations, as the film talks about. With my wife being from Central Asia, this added to my interest. But as a Gaian, I'm even more intrigued by the question that Yusuf Kamalov raises in the film. And he just says it so perfectly. If we cannot save such a small natural object, how will we save the planet? And if not, what then? What will become of humanity and the Earth? So I'm looking forward to exploring this today and its ramifications for the broader global ecological crisis. So, enough from me. Our first speaker is James Chapman, one of the co-directors of the film and an environmentalist currently working with the Partnering Initiative, an Oxford-based NGO dedicated to systematizing and professionalizing multi-sector partnerships for transformational sustainable development. After that, and I'm not going to take a pause, I'll just introduce also Annie Liddell, who also worked on the film as a co-director and then stayed on to screen the film in Uzbekistan, as well as serve as a project manager at the National Climate Center within the Ministry of Ecology of Uzbekistan. So after that, I'll take it back for a moment to introduce both Kate and Aynabat. So without further ado, James.
Great. Thank you, Eric. And thank you for organizing. And thanks everyone for watching the film and for coming today. Yeah, so I'm one kind of team member of the team that made River to a Missing Sea. And I think I should give a little background on the film and kind of how it came about. So none of us were filmmakers. Instead, Annie and I both studied anthropology, and Oscar, the third director, studied history. And so that kind of informed our approach to the film, this kind of oral history series kind of interviews. And so we spent the best part of 3 months in 2023 filming along the Amu Darya Delta in western Uzbekistan and into Karakoram, Pakistan. We did around 30 interviews, I think, with kind of a range of fishermen, NGO workers, professors, students, even an art historian. And then began the editing process. So we translated these interviews from four different languages. And we did this through a network of student volunteers. So we met lots of excited and motivated students at universities in Western Uzbekistan and Karakoram, Pakistan, who volunteered to translate. And then we've since screened the film across the UK and internationally. And here are a few kind of behind the scenes shots. But since then, we have had another project that I'll let Annie tell you a little bit about, called the Amu Darya Education Project.
Program, James. So yeah, just to follow on. So as James said, we made this documentary film, and after having finished it, kind of James went away and did a great job on the editing. which was hard, as you pointed out, with the several different languages going on, and with a range of very enthusiastic students who gave quite different definitions of various words and kind of called back. And from there, I was screening the film in Uzbekistan while working in the Ministry of Ecology. And I was quite struck by how much interest there was from students on this topic. Surprised even that a lot of students were saying it was something that they had not really spoken about in their education system. They hadn't spoken about in their families, at home, or with their friends, and that they hadn't even seen what kind of Kazakhstan really looked like, which was something that kind of initially interested us into making the film, was that we kind of thought there hadn't been much visual kind of footage or storytelling about not just the Aral Sea, but further upstream of the river. And so it was based on that we went on to develop a project to kind of follow up on the film, which was a kind of educational program that we ran in Khwarezm last summer, so 2025, in partnership with a lot of students from across Uzbekistan, quite a few from Tashkent, but also a few in Khwarezm. We delivered 2-day workshops with 10 schools, and it kind of finished with an eco summit where we brought together all of the students who are most motivated to kind of have a big discussion about setting up eco clubs in their schools. And that's something that our the kind of partner NGO that we were working with and through and constantly in communication with, who's based in Khwarezm, that's something she continues to do with those schools. So this was kind of the follow through of what we kind of felt was really when we were making the film and when we were asking for the grants, and afterwards people were asking always what happens next. And I think that pathway is not always clear. And quite pleased to have kind of fulfilled the next step. I kind of and to see, I don't know how that step continues with Elena Khan, who's in Kiva Center NGO in Khwarezm. So I'll leave it there and hand back to Eric. Thanks very much for having us.
Of course. And maybe I'll just ask you, where the eco action groups are right now. Have some formed, and are they doing some work?
So I'd say it's very much still centre-led through the NGO that Elena Khan runs. And I think that's quite reflective of a lot of the structural challenges we had, our team, particularly around the fact that kind of schools have quite limited incentives and extra capacity to deal with this. And even if you had teachers and students who are very keen, there isn't a kind of a culture of promoting extracurriculars and supporting students and setting it up. And and of course, students quite young, they're sort of 11 to 16. So it is quite led still by Elena, but she has quite a dedicated community, which has grown quite significantly. And that's, I think, a very nice thing, even if the kind of schools kind of hubs that we were really hoping might get going has been varied success. 2 of them have a very motivated teacher, which is really what's made the difference, I'd say.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking more about that in the discussion. Next, we'll have Kate Waters, who is co-founder and executive director of Crude Accountability and has a special focus in the Central Asia, Russia, and Caucasus, and including working with activists and affected communities in the region. So I'm very glad, Kate, that you could join us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And James and Annie, thank you for this really heartbreaking and beautiful film that you've made. It's a really important piece of work, and I hope that you continue to be able to show it around, because it's so important. There's so much to say on this topic, and I will keep it brief in my 5 minutes. But I want to focus on sort of 2 or 3 key points that I think are raised in the film, but also continue to be really, really critical for the region. And just to underscore, and not only for the region, for the world, that the Aral Sea used to be the 3rd largest lake in the world, and it is now hardly there. I mean, you saw the images in the film, right? It has been completely desiccated, completely destroyed. And as Eric mentioned, over the course of just a few generations, really destroying this incredible natural resource and environmental and ecosystem or ecosystems for multiple species, not just humans. And yet what we see is there has not really been a shift or a change in the type of human behavior that caused this destruction. Cotton production still continues, not only in Uzbekistan and Karakalpakstan, but also in Turkmenistan. It continues to be a major economic driver for the region. This sort of monoculture use of resources that benefit very, very few people. And I'm sure you took note in the film itself of how the cotton was being picked and processed, and what even the clothing that the women who are picking this cotton wear to try to protect their bodies from what they're doing. So that's one thing. The second thing is that there are other, and we can talk about this or not, other very destructive environmental practices going on throughout Central Asia, and not only, including oil and gas extraction, that put at risk other natural resources like the Caspian Sea, for example, which is also shrinking. And one has to start to wonder if any lessons or what lessons have been taken from this catastrophic disaster that's happened with the Amu Darya and with the Aral Sea. The final thing I want to point out is, we talk about climate refugees, environmental refugees from crises that are happening around the world. And I work a lot in Kazakhstan and throughout Central Asia, and in Western Kazakhstan, where there's a lot of environmental damage due in part to overfishing and oil extraction in the Caspian Sea, but also the desertification and desiccation that's just happening with the heating up of the planet in Western Kazakhstan along the coast of the Caspian Sea. There are climate refugees in Western Kazakhstan who have come from Karakalpakstan. They have been forced out of places like Nukus and other towns in Karakalpakstan and moved to Western Kazakhstan, where they can create maybe a somewhat better life. So we are already in this process of humans and animals being displaced from their homes because they cannot live where they're living. And I think it brings us back, as Eric already mentioned, it brings us back to the question that Yusuf asks in the film. It's like, who's responsible? Who's going to take responsibility? And how do we plan to protect this planet if we can't shepherd the resources that we have in our own backyards? So I'll stop with that. But again, I want to thank you both for just a really powerful depiction of what's happening in this really fragile area. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And our final speaker is Aynabat Yaylymova, who is the director of the Progres Foundation, which provides one of the few sources of science-based news and policy information in the Turkmen language, and is working to create a more accountable and transparent governance system that serves the people of Turkmenistan. So really glad she could join us today and give her thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. And I'm glad to be a part of this discussion, and really good job, James and Annie, and thank you for such a significant contribution, because this stories, this type of content, there's a lack of this type of content on a regional level, and I will talk about at the country level, like Turkmenistan. So I am from the country, from a neighboring country. James and Annie were in Uzbekistan. I am from Turkmenistan. It's another downstream country. So it's the situation is very similar to Uzbekistan, but it's much, much worse because the political system is closed. It's a dynastic authoritarian regime. So when I watched this film several times, it was very nice to get this feel, right, of a village life. We have many, many villages like the one that you're describing, the areas. But for me, this is, I think, primarily the story of people's memory and storytelling when the state institutions collapse in the context of authoritarianism and destructive Soviet legacy. So we all know what happens when the government, when state institutions weaken and the government conceals information from the public in a more broader concept of, for example, the disaster, Chernobyl disaster, right? I think it's a well known now, and we can all relate to the story. So I also thought that the music was setting a meditation mood, and kind of for me it was a more like a meditation on grief, right? What was lost and what will be lost due to human activities. So for Turkmenistan, it's a issue of national security because 95% of our water resources come from outside of the country. So, but it's so downplayed by authoritarian government that I believe the policymakers and authoritarian policymakers cannot connect and don't understand how the length and depth of these issues. So there are also, just to remind you, Kate kind of listed a few major background environmental issues happening in the region, but I also want to add that Turkmenistan is also the largest methane gas emitter in the world. We have the first largest proven natural gas reserves, and it's a very water stressed country, and we inefficiently use water resources to grow and export wheat and cotton. And Kate mentioned that in cotton, the government uses forced labor, and we are part of the coalition. We work with international coalition to bring attention to the use of forced labor in cotton industry. What does this mean? That means that the state forces teachers and doctors to pick cotton, and also children. So another thing that I wanted to highlight is that the Turkmenistan is suffering from dust storms mentioned in the film, but the tragedy in our case, and I'm not trying to create a unique case here for Turkmenistan, is that government does not report or warn the population about natural disasters. So we get to know about these events from independent media broadcasting from outside of the country, but it's already too late, right? So we just kind of record these disasters. And also there is a depopulation happening in Turkmenistan, driven by economic mismanagement, but also, and it's very, very sad for me to see that a lot of international organizations do not even mention the environmental degradation inside the country that is actually driving these migrants in search of work outside of the country. So there's especially young people just like this main character, I forgot her name, but just like her age, right? They graduate and they have really bright, nice ideas and aspirations for the country, but unfortunately, they are forced to leave the country because of the economic situation. So, and I'll stop here because I can talk for a long time. But thank you. It's great to join this discussion.
Thank you, Aynabat. I think we will open it up to questions. I have the first one, privilege of a moderator. I hear the term Aral Sea all the time, and in this film heard Aral Kum, as it's now seen as the Aral Desert, not the Aral Sea. And that shocked me more than anything else, because that's the shifting baseline, right? That one day in 3 or 4 more generations, some people will deny that there was ever a sea there, right? They won't even imagine that that was possible. It's like finding seashells on the mountain. It's just hard for our brains to kind of understand the geological time. But I thought about that in the future context. But what I'm hearing from you, Annie, is that that's kind of already starting. I mean, you mentioned the students, and so this is the question. You mentioned the students that don't really know about the Aral Sea. Is there a kind of a shifting baseline of perception already where it's no longer news, or it's just kind of accepted, or what is the state of the understanding of the Aral Desert now in Uzbekistan that you saw as you were there for the past few years?
Um, I'd be curious what Aynabat has to say definitely about this as well, because I would say that actually a lot of those students I was talking about really are in the kind of in the eastern part of the country, which is, quite a long way from where the Aral Sea used to be anyway. And that kind of history of having very limited space, civic space, and for information being very controlled, and that probably, there wasn't much awareness at the different end of the country. And even in the area where it was happening, there was not necessarily, an idea of why. And so I'd say that's what kind of one thing is really that they're in different geographical locations, although they are under the same government, and it comes, I guess, from a history of very controlled civic space, which kind of we know is ongoing, if it's slightly, liberated in some ways by things like Telegram, and the government does recognize that the sea is, at the moment, the government recognizes. Eric, it was a bit scary to hear you say that something like people might deny that there ever was a sea, but that hadn't even occurred to me, But I think the government is quite vocal about the fact that because it is, quite a strong source of kind of environmental diplomacy, should we say, a way of getting more on the stage of the world to show this as a disaster, and that is probably quite a good thing in lots of sense. It does kind of promote Uzbekistan's place. So I would say that, but the kind of shifting baseline is probably very real. And I hope maybe something like the film and the record that it gives is something that might help to preserve against that. But I imagine that baseline also is quite real, shifting in Turkmenistan as well. And that kind of I guess the things like dust storms have always been a phenomenon in that area of the world. It's the frequency and intensity and how much you expect, what to expect from it, and the fact that, of course, you have the technology now that you can warn people, and that you could introduce measures to reduce the impacts. It's difficult.
Aynabat, do you want to add anything?
No, it struck me Aral Kum, right? Because Kum is sand, Kum in Uzbek and Gum in Turkmen. So it's just we have Karakum desert in Turkmenistan, and 80% of the country is desert. So at the people's level, there is no recognition, right? The people just know that their frequency of dust storms or floods, right? That it's much more, but there is no understanding that actually climate change is impacting, and actually human activity is climate change. It's also very far for ordinary Turkmens to understand what's happening, because government there is no reporting about this in the media. There's nothing in Turkmen media about this issue. So I think the one strain of hope in this movie, that what I'm seeing is that you actually got to go to the country at the invitation, or you collaborated with the government, right? That's a dream for Turkmenistan, right? The government to get to the level where it accepts that these processes are happening. Yes, it may be to a certain level still controls the narratives, but it's in Turkmenistan there's complete denial of it. And the destruction continues. So yeah, this Kızıl Kum in Uzbekistan, it's just at the level of the words, right? It's like, it's really, when you hear it in a native language, you're like, what's happening? You just want to you just want to keep asking questions. Yeah.
I wanted to ask Aynabat if misinformation has filled that gap. I think that Annie and I found that in Uzbekistan, the media is slightly more open than Turkmenistan, it seems, but there was still misinformation around the causes of the dust storms and of the Aral Sea crisis. We had people talk about kind of the Afghan wind or kind of Turkmen wind, and also some people talking about nuclear testing perhaps affecting the winds, and others talking about the saxaul, the plant which is planted on the bottom of the Aral Sea to try and keep down the dust, perhaps sucking the water away, and all a few different theories that kind of cropped up because of the lack of civic space. I wonder to what extent that's happening in Turkmenistan. How do they understand the dust storms?
No, there's no. It's exactly as you said. At the population level, the environmental literacy is very low. So when something happens, we have to look into the resources in Kazakhstan. And it's Kate can tell you probably more, but I don't follow the Kazakhstan closely. But it's just the news sources, right? What's really happening? Because Kazakhstan is also impacted. We share a very small border with Kazakhstan. Like, how are they impacted by dust storms or the Aral Sea situation, impact on public health, right? That's a connection. You can really appeal to people not in a I would say it will be a generic conversation if you start using climate change and dust storms. But if you connect them to public health, for example, increased miscarriages or respiratory conditions in Turkmenistan, right? So the at the population level, people are more open to talk, like to tell the stories. Yes, things are changing. Just like in your, that's a fascinating part to see Central Asian faces telling their own stories. Like that's I think it's empowering, and that there is because the authoritarian government wants to erase the institutional memory, and somebody should record it, right? And we're the outside groups and doing this with a limited capacity, both financial and human resources. But it's just to be able to get it to the media and put it together like you guys did. It's a very powerful message. Then our work is also needed, but on a bad or good day, I'm very skeptical, right? Uh, how much statistics can you convey, right? Because population is not reacting. It's illiterate, statistics wise, illiterate in Turkmenistan. Statistics mean nothing because government lies all the time about growth and that they're cleaning up the air and cleaning up this or that, and it's just there's no trust between the government and its people. Yeah, so but the misinformation in the context of Turkmenistan, if somebody wants to study it, it's a laboratory. I mean, social laboratory of what can happen when, again, weak institutions and you kill everybody, literally destroy or move people working in like a media environment. Yeah.
I think, oh, go ahead, Annie, if you.
I was just going to say, speaking of which, Eric, I don't know if you have something to say about the US also trying to kill data and the use of science to spread real information. We think
Yeah, I
surely an
have
easier
to say about
environment
that,
to do
but
something than
not in
Turkmenistan.
this context.
True.
Derail this wonderful conversation and yeah, and but there's lots of writing on the Gaian Ways website on that topic. Gene, I saw you on mute. Do you have uh, oh, Brendan? Oh, Gene first, and then
Okay, thanks. So my name's Jean. I live in Utah, land of the Great Salt Lake. And first of all, I just want to thank the filmmakers for this excellent piece of work. You did a fantastic job telling a very powerful and rich story. And I have, I'm sort of blown away by the last conversation with Aynabat about mistruths and misunderstandings. And living in the United States right now is very challenging for lots of reasons, Annie, that you just mentioned. But also in a state where our governor tells us that we should pray for rain. And so anyway, Utah's rather a unique place. But I have followed two lakes in California over the years, both the Owens Lake and Mono Lake. And again, there's not a straight line between the conditions involved with the Aral Sea, but there's a lot of similarity there. And worries now with the Great Salt Lake have me wondering if there would be any interest on the part of the filmmakers in perhaps getting this to Utah, and if there was anything I could do to help make connections. I think it's a story well worth hearing here as well. And again, not with straight across factors in all cases, but certainly a story that truly has great meaning for us here as well. So I just thought I'd throw that out along with a big heartfelt thank you for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Gene. I think we'd absolutely love to screen anywhere and everywhere. And I think it'd be really interesting from an American perspective to see kind of a a similar process through kind of communism, capitalism, but the crisis of the commons is kind of follows both. So I think definitely would love to be put in touch with any potential screenings. Thanks.
Also, just to add on that, maybe Ainura, who is studying in the US at the moment and is, she's in the film and subsequently went on to study in the US, there could be something really cool about her. If we could find a way to fund the fact that she could go around showing the film and to kind of hold those discussions in Utah. I mean, it would be fascinating and incredibly cool way that we can use kind of a very transnational world to its best advantages.
Okay, Eric, is there a way that you can help me make these connections once we're offline
Absolutely.
later on? Okay, that's a great idea. And I'm not affiliated with any specific group that's working on the Great Salt Lake, but I do have some connections and have met some folks that could get that ball rolling. And I'd be really honored to do that.
Thanks, Gene.
And I'm leaving early, not out of lack of interest, but thanks again. When I blink off, I want to say goodbye in advance.
Thanks. Go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, thank you to everybody who's here, filmmakers and Kate and Aynabat. It just expanding my mind so much. And a question that I have in light of the economic interest that is present for the ongoing use of cotton and wheat, as Aynabat was talking about, and the tendency of the earth toward monoculture, as Kate was speaking about, and as a polyculture fanatic myself when it comes to agriculture. I'm noticing that in the film, either the narrator or the young woman speaks about the flow that is still there in the Amu Darya and in the other Darya. So, yeah, the one that starts with an S. That Go ahead, James. Thank you. What is that name?
Seer Daria.
Yes, thank you. That it's not as though there is no longer water input available. It's that it's being completely or nearly completely diverted. And I just wonder, either historically, what used to be cultivated there, because people had to eat along those corridors and make their living along those corridors, in addition to the fishing culture that has gone away. But I'm assuming there was some agriculture available. Whether there is exploration already by those farmers or the government or local communities regarding the appropriation of those agriculture lands, either to polycultural desert restoration, the way Jeff Lawton and others have done in Australia, or toward less water hungry, even if it is monoculture crops, so that we're not stealing away anyone's prosperity, but we are returning a greater biodiversity to the region. And just what, if anything, is afoot as regards possibilities in that direction?
Can give it a little bit of an answer. So we visited, Annie, you might be able to remember the name. There was an innovation center next to the Aral Sea where they were testing various either salt-tolerant crops or less water-intensive crops. I think cotton is one of the most water-intensive crops you can grow. And essentially the water is pumped from the river or directed from the river into what was desert. So it's kind of extremely inefficient in terms of just leakage. And as they say in the film, they have to wash up the fields, and that is extremely wasteful. So we were looking at salt-tolerant crops, and also the NGO that we work with in Kiva. They are working with introducing sesame to lots of different farms. But that's quite a small-scale introduction, I think. But yeah, there's now, I guess, 4 or 5 generations of cotton farmers in the area. So it's not purely a kind of an economic kind of switch crops. There's a whole kind of cultural background and re-education, different tools, different processes that would be needed for that switch. From what we saw, there were these kind of little pockets of different crops that weren't cotton. But yeah, no massive change in terms of diverting from cotton. Maybe Aynabat or Annie or Kate have some more to say there.
Kate, do you want to? I think you worked on these issues, right? Do you want to?
If you want to go first, go ahead, and then I'll
Yeah.
follow on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have much to say because I don't think there are, as I mentioned, there's the institutions are really weak, the government, state institutions. So there might be some small scale projects, but they're not amplified or not in this package as a reform of agriculture, right? Because the for example in Turkmenistan, it's I don't know, more than 70% of people are employed in agriculture, but due to you go to the villages and you can see that people are really suffering from lack of water, and there's the soil is completely it's for many years the government is trying to introduce drip irrigation and nothing is happening. There is nothing to be joyful about or hopeful. I wish I could be, right? Like I don't every time I go to some kind of meeting, and I always feel bad because I'm like a bringer of bad news, but I'm also an expert on authoritarianism. I think I can just like advertise my skills and my thinking, because it's really the going back to the question of like cotton, right? As I said, that feeds a lot of the keeps employed, not feeds, hardly feeds it because it's below the market rate, the prices, and it's also Soviet system. Farmers have to sell it to the government at set prices. There's quota, so it's all these communist practices continue, and the government is really clinging, and the international community is really trying to understand why are they clinging to this old model of growing cotton and exporting it. And harvest is dropping. The harvest level is dropping right now, both wheat and cotton, and government is not acknowledging that. But I think the core of the matter is that it's a preservation of the regime. So there's no consideration for your statistics, for environmental concerns. It's just to preserve the status quo and this government and have the elite around you kind of benefiting from this tragic loss of human life and also land, right? So I think these are the kind of major concepts that I'm using to explain it to international community. That's the thinking. So this is not about giving more money to the current government so they can start measuring something, because those funds will be misused, and the international funding, most likely a lot goes to maybe Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan because they are much more open than Turkmenistan. But in Turkmenistan, there is no funding. That very low levels of funding goes to the government. Yeah.
I would just add very quickly. I think Aynabat, you've summed it up really, really well. I mean, I think what we're seeing is this really entrenched legacy of centralized planning from the Soviet period that wasn't only an economic system. This was a system that was designed to destroy whatever semblance of local or regional identity there was. I mean, countries were created where there were no countries before. I mean, on purpose to divide up nationalities and divide up identities and tribal connections and clans, and it was done purposely. And I think to some degree in Turkmenistan, I mean, Aynabat, you can speak to this much more than I, but certainly in Kazakhstan, a lot of what happened was that to a lesser degree in Uzbekistan, because it was always a more sedentary society that was built around established communities and cities and towns. But the nomadic piece of all of this is another part of it, that there were a lot of people who were drawn into cultivation on massive collective farms or state-owned farms that were hunter-gatherers prior to that. I mean, they were nomads. They moved with their sheep, they moved with their horses and their cows, and this was a completely imposed way of living on them. And so, as Aynabat said, the government wasn't, these weren't systems that were designed to feed people properly or even contribute to like social communities. This was about numbers, statistics, meeting the 5-year plan, meeting the goal, and now maintaining these really corrupt systems. And Turkmenistan is by far the most corrupt system, but there is massive corruption in Kazakhstan. There's massive corruption in Uzbekistan. I mean, this month, the Kazakhs have created, the Kazakhstani government is creating a new constitution that actually has provisions in it to limit what civil society can do. I mean, it goes on and on. But, and I'm not an expert in this particular field, but in terms of your question, Brennan, about diversifying, I know that there have been efforts in the Fergana Valley, which is at the other end of this whole river system, which is also a very multicultural area with, you know, different, where in the Fergana Valley you've got Uzbeks, Turkmens, Tajiks. We've got this whole conglomerate of people, and there have been experiments with improving diversity of crops and growing smaller, cleaner farm, you know, having cleaner farms there. Because the other thing that we haven't talked about that is really important, especially the further downstream we get, is the overuse of pesticides that has happened for decades here. So when Yusuf in the film talks about cleaning the fields or washing the fields, it is salty water for sure, and whatever is in the canals and the river now, but it's also this residue of pesticides that has been there since the 60s that was applied in massive amounts, way higher than anything that was healthy for human beings. And if you look at the maternal mortality rates, if you look at anemia rates, if you look at child mortality rates for Karakalpakstan going back to the late 60s, early 70s, those rates have always been higher than in other places. The Soviet propaganda was a horrible racist story about why, but it's really about over-contamination by pollutants, by pesticides, by very, very poor agricultural management.
Thank you, everybody, for that.
That was getting us heavy here. Importantly so. I mean, you're just peeling at the layers, Kate. I mean, just the Soviet propaganda, the intentional creation of this system, not for any true human development or sustainable development, which is a whole other level, but just purely to achieve economic goals or empire goals.
Eric, can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
I think it's important, and maybe if everyone knows this, forgive me, but just as a reminder, the Soviets actually had a system or a plan to reverse the flow of Siberian rivers to bring water to Central Asia when they saw that this problem was beginning. I mean, the hubris is like unimaginable. You're going to reverse the natural flow of a river. It's crazy. And yet this was the plan, and it was the plan for a long time by a government that was recognized by the rest of the world as legitimate, not like maybe not their favorite friend, but like a legitimate government that had the right to govern its people with this wackadoodle destructive plan. And so I think when we talk about like why aren't we learning, like how come we can't manage this small object, it's because of thinking then like that. It's like engineers on steroids. No offense to any engineers here, but like at a certain point, like reality has to set in, right?
Hopefully. But it's a really good case study, and I think we should look more. I'm going to look more into it because I mean, there's a growing urgency around the conversation of geoengineering, and that's doing that at the global scale. And who knows what kind of outcomes, unexpected, unintended, will come out of a tinkering mechanistically at the whole global scale. What other questions are people holding? We only have 12 minutes or so. So if Francesco or perfect, you predicted my question. Go ahead. You are on mute though, so just make sure to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry. I was having a bit of a problem, but I'm here, and of course, I wanted to ask about what are the chances really, but I mean, I've looked for some information on how the European Union and China are trying to sort of help into, for example, for the South Aral to plant trees that are able to survive there and desalinize and prevent sandstorms. But I'm not quite. I mean, feels like a bit very depressing because I mean it's almost as if we just gave up. I mean, the government of Uzbekistan just gave up and just chose to do this rather than restore the sea. And it's also, I think, in the movie mentioned that it's not as it wouldn't be as profitable to restore the sea because of the cotton trade and stuff. So I was really wondering if there are any chances to restore the ecosystem as it was, or do we have to rely, for example, on aqueducts from the Caspian or some other stuff? I'm not sure, which would be massive projects and probably not very doable anyway. So
Can I just say one thing in response, and then maybe hand over to James or Kate? Or I think one of the things that really struck me when I was having conversations with students in Uzbekistan was their kind of quite strong fixation, which I think is quite human, and also I would have myself. I think that we all like kind of the idea of restoration and big change, and I think that is certainly necessary. Big change is necessary, but big change to prevent worsening is necessary. So the river is still retreating. And so there is drastic changes that need to happen. I mean, all across the world, but if we're talking specifically about Amu Darya, but in order to stop further loss and I think one of the things we were trying to achieve with the film, which I don't think it actually fully manages to achieve because of the format of kind of oral history and relying only on what people, chose to share and not leading them or kind of specifically seeking certain answers, was that focusing on the river rather than the sea was kind of what we tried to set out to do and say, and I think that's something that became more apparent afterwards, was the kind of what we have is at the moment is still pretty good. It's just that things are still getting worse, and that the drastic change is not to try and get back to a previous point, but almost like running to standstill was kind of what I took away from it. I don't know if others might feel differently perhaps, or
If I may add, so I don't know about the Uzbekistan, but the government of Turkmenistan loves planting trees. Like I don't know, you can cover the whole planet probably by the number of trees that they report. We don't know. There's no way to verify how much they plant every year. So the general there's no impact assessment. Is it really needed to stop desertification, for example, which is rapid and it's just spreading? But it's also, I think the general mood, Francesca, you just captured very well. It's people, it's government due to many factors, they gave up and the population gave up. So when we post something on shrinking Caspian Sea, the recent news, or the recent study on Amu Darya River flow, right? That just came out last week or so. The people will just say Allah, Allah. Now it's only will Allah help us, right? It's just there is nothing we can do about it, nothing the government can do about it. So I think that's a general mood people don't have energy, understanding, nuanced and understanding what is restoration. Maybe perhaps the very small group of young people, but it's also I just also want to add to this piece that this canal building. There's one obsession is planting trees. Another obsession of the government is building canals, right? So the Afghanistan right now. This is building this canal, probably already finished building it. Who knows what's happening in Afghanistan right now? But I think they are in the process of building this unsustainable canal to divert water from Amu Darya. And that's going to be devastating for farmers in Turkmenistan. So that's another piece. And Afghanistan is a pariah state, has no international agreements, will not listen to anybody. So you have to kind of keep them friendly, right? And the government engages in sending them aid, and periodically it's a special analysis policy, it requires policy analysis how to keep Afghanistan friendly. So because we share border with Afghanistan. So I think there are measures like that. Like we have Karakum Canal that I think 20% gets 20% of the water diverted to go to Karakum Canal in Turkmenistan from Amu Darya. So these kind of schemes, as Kate was saying, like who makes them, and why is international media? My question is always, or experts make any noise or write about it? But that's a totally overlooked area because even donors used to give. Right now, it's shrunk after what happened to the United States, foreign aid in the United States. But it's just completely overlooked area of reporting, covering, and all that stuff. I'll stop here.
I see. Thank you.
Perhaps instead, it's more, I think maybe hope or positivity seems misplaced in conversations like this when there's just so much to be concerned about. But just to link back to the work that Annie's been doing over in Central Asia, I think one key part is I think it's a third of Uzbekistan is under 18. And there's this huge kind of hopeful part of the population. And so I think that's why kind of initiatives that kind of keep it running, where you can engage young people in kind of environmentalism and in this sort of stuff are so important. And I wonder, Annie, you're talking about kind of restoration being such a powerful idea. And I think perhaps there's space for restoration, Aral Sea, Amu Darya, these stories to be really, really powerful vehicles for kind of attitudinal change, cultural change, that perhaps leads to political change. Obviously, so much harder in Turkmenistan, but I'd be interested if you think that a Turkmen version of the film would be useful in any way. But I just wanted to give a small bit of perhaps hope for the future. And one other thing that perhaps whenever we do these film screenings, people often ask us they look to us for kind of some hopeful words, which feels strange sometimes to people to provide. And but is that the Aral Sea has been dry before, kind of in the 13th century, with Genghis Khan kind of redirecting the Amu Darya into the Caspian or the Sea of Darya, and refilled in the preceding centuries. So who knows? Obviously, right now it's not going to refill with what we're doing, but it's when we zoom out, perhaps there's some room for hope, and hope leads to action.
Wow. See, I'm going to just make a comment because Annie, you noted kind of your hope that the film would, reveal some of what the Aral Sea used to be, and it really did. I mean, the videos, archival footage of the catching fish and shipping there, and even the story of the girl, well, the elder woman in the film, but when she was a girl swimming across it and being afraid to actually swim across it because the current was so strong, that was such powerful. But full stop. And then James just adding a whole nuance. I had no idea that the Aral Sea was once dry before, but to actually imagine that all that life that you show in the archival footage was there after it had been killed. So that is maybe the optimism that we can pull from this hour. That yes, it is temporarily destroyed and perhaps permanently, but it doesn't have to be if we make different choices, if we, including, shifting governance or primarily shifting governance. There is some opportunity to at least prevent further degradation of the rivers going into the sea, and maybe even one day recovering the sea. That might be the last point. We have a couple of minutes. If anyone has burning concluding remarks or a question that they've been holding on to, yep.
May I say something?
Go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for your film and this discussion. It's inspiring to see the issue addressed with such systemic depth. Coming from Kazakhstan, I've grown up with Aral Sea crisis. It's extremely covered in our school curriculum and national news, so it's a deeply personal topic for me. My academic focus currently is biosecurity, and I see this is not just as environmental disaster, but as complex biological experiment. For example, is island of Возрождение, Rebirth, Aralsk 7, where biological testing occurred. When the sea receded, it formed a land bridge connecting a potentially contaminated site to the mainland. This forces us to consider how ecological collapse rewrites epidemiological risks. And I have a question. From a biosecurity perspective, are we doing enough to monitor the potential of reemergence of dormant pathogens from the exposed seabed? Or this is biological aspect still largely overshadowed by chemical and hydrological concerns? That's all.
Who wants to grab with that? Kate?
I mean, I think the answer to the question is no. I think there's been a lot of effort to cover up a lot of what you just described, Nikita, and there's a lot of reluctance, I think, to acknowledge that happened there. And I think there's so much unknown about, even I mean, someone knows that the information is there, but what we're talking about before with this informational vacuum, I think it's extremely difficult to even understand what it is that would be monitored and then protected from if and when that becomes the conclusion. But I think there's very little information about that. I remember when the first stories about that came out and there was this sort of horror around it. But I don't know that there's been much follow-on since then. But very important point.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank all of you, James, Annie, Aynabat, Kate, and everyone for joining today. This was an excellent discussion, and I look forward to putting it up on YouTube and getting more folks to watch it, because it really was provocative and challenging, and yes, maybe mostly not hopeful, but there is a little bit of hope in the context of a challenging polycrisis future. So thank you, everybody, and I hope to hear more of how the project changes minds in Uzbekistan and perhaps even in Utah.